Dear people watching and listening, kindly like and share this video and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Kindly support me through Patreon so that I can keep making such audiobooks for you. For your ease, the video has been divided into chapters which can be found in the description. Izharul Haq, The Truth Revealed by Maulana M. Rahmatullah Keranvi. This is the very book which empowered Sheikh Ahmed Deedat with the knowledge of the Christian scriptures, which enabled him to challenge the claims of the Christians on Islam, the divinity of Jesus Christ, and their own religion as a whole. The book, internationally recognized as one of the most authoritative and objective studies of the Bible, was originally written in Arabic under the title Izharul Haq by the distinguished 19th century Indian scholar Maulana Rahmatullah Keranvi and appeared in 1864. The book was subsequently translated into Urdu and then from Urdu into English by Muhammad Wali Razi. The present publishers are bringing the Wali Razi translation out as a series in several installments, of which this is the 3 parts put together. Maulana Rahmatullah wrote the book in response to the Christian offensive against Islam in British India, and specifically to counter the subversive attack made by the Reverend CCP founder, who had written a book in Urdu entitled Mizanul Haq, the open intention of which was to cast doubts into the minds of the Muslims about the authenticity of the Quran and Islam. Part 1. The Books of the Bible.
Errors in the calculation of the Israelites' number. We read in the Book of Numbers, chapter 1, verses 45 to 47, this statement: So were all those that were numbered of the children of Israel, by the house of their fathers, from 20 years old and upward, all that were able to go forth to war in Israel. Even all they that were numbered were 600,000 and 3,550. But the Levites after the tribe of their fathers were not numbered among them. These verses imply that the number of fighting people of the Israelites was more than 600,000. This number excludes the men, women, and children of the Levi tribe, and all the women of the other tribes of the Israelites, and all those men who were under 20 years of age. If we include the number of all the people of Israelites excluded from this enumeration, their total should not be less than 2,500,000. This statement is wrong for 5 reasons.
The first reason:
the total number of men and women of the Israelites was 70 at the time of their arrival in Egypt. This is evident from Genesis chapter 46, verse 27, Exodus chapter 1, verse 5, and Deuteronomy chapter 10, verse 22. The greatest possible period of their stay in Egypt is 215 years. It cannot be more. It has been mentioned in the first chapter of the book of Exodus that the sons of the people of Israel were killed and their daughters left to live 89 years before their liberation from Egypt. Now, keeping in mind their total number at their arrival in Egypt, the duration of their stay in Egypt, and the killing of their sons by the king, if we assume that after every 25 years they doubled in number, and their sons were not killed at all, even then their number would not reach 25,000 in the period of their stay in Egypt, let alone 2,500,000. If we keep in view the killing of their sons, this number becomes a physical impossibility. The second reason. It must be far from the truth that their number increased from 70 to 2,500,000 in such a short period. While they were subjected to the worst kind of persecution and hardships by the king of Egypt. In comparison, the Egyptians who enjoyed all the comforts of life did not increase at that rate. The Israelites lived a collective life in Egypt. If they are believed to have been more than 2,500,000, it would be a unique example in human history that a population of this size is oppressed and persecuted and their sons killed before their eyes without a sigh of resistance and rebellion from them. Even animals fight and resist to save their offspring. The third reason. The Book of Exodus, chapter 12, verse 39, taken with them the cattle herds and flocks, and the same book, Exodus, chapter 5, verse 19, also informs us that they crossed the river in a single night, and that they used to travel every day, as mentioned in Exodus, chapter 13, verse 21, and that Moses used to give them verbal orders to march, as told in Exodus, chapter 14, verse 1. The fourth reason. If the number were correct, it would necessitate that they had a place for their camp large enough to accommodate 2,500,000 of people, along with their herds of cattle. The fact is that the area surrounding Mount Sinai and the area of the 12 springs in Elim, which is a place on the edge of the Red Sea with 12 fountains of water and 70 trees of dates, where, according to the Pentateuch, the prophet Moses camped after the rescue of the Israelites from Egypt, as mentioned in Exodus, chapter 15, verse 27, are not sufficiently large to have accommodated the Israelites and their cattle. The fifth reason. We find the following statement in Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 22. And the Lord, thy God, will put out those nations before thee by little and little. Thou mayest not consume them at once, lest the beasts of the field increase upon thee. It is geographically true that Palestine extended nearly 200 miles in length and 90 in breadth. Now, if the number of the Israelites was really 2,500,000, and they had captured Palestine after killing all its residents all at once, how was it possible for the beasts to have overcome the number of the Israelites? Because had they been much less in number than stated, even then, they would have been enough to populate such a small area. Ibn Khaldun also refuted this number in his Muqaddimah, saying that according to the researches made by the scholars, the gap between Israel and Moses is only 3 generations. It is unbelievable that in a period of only 3 generations, they could increase to that number. In view of the above arguments, it is obvious that the people of the book, the Christians and the Jews, do not possess any arguments to prove their claim that the books of the Pentateuch were written or conveyed by the prophet Moses. It is, therefore, not binding upon us to believe in these books until irrefutable arguments to support their claim. The status of the Book of Joshua. We have already seen that the Pentateuch, which enjoys the status of being a fundamental book of the Christian faith, cannot be proved to be authentic and believable. Let us now proceed to find out the truth about the Book of Joshua, the next book in importance. First of all, the name of the author of this book is not known with certainty, and the period of its composition is also unknown. The Christian scholars profess 5 different opinions. 1. Gerard, Deodat Huet, Albert Patrick, Tomlin and Dr. Gray believe that it was written by the prophet Joshua himself. 2. Dr. Lightfoot claims that Phinehas is the author of this book. Phinehas is the grandson of the prophet Aaron. He was mentioned in Numbers chapter 25, verse 7, chapter 31, verse 6, Psalms chapter 106, verse 30, Joshua chapter 22, verse 13, and Judges chapter 20, verse 28. 3. Calvin says that it was written by Eliezer. 4. Moldhauer and Van Til believe it to have been written by Samuel. And 5. Henry claimed that it was written by the prophet Jeremiah. Readers should note the contradictory opinions of these Christian scholars, especially keeping in mind the fact that Joshua and Jeremiah are separated by a period of 850 years. The presence of this great difference in opinion is, in itself, a strong evidence that the book is not believed to be authentic by them. Their opinions are generally based on their calculations, supported by some vague notions, indicating that a certain person might be the author of a certain book. If we make a comparison between Joshua chapter 15, verse 63, and Samuel chapter 5, verses 6 to 8, it is quite clear that this book was written before the 7th year of the ascension of the prophet David to the throne. Joshua chapter 15, verse 63 says, As for the Jebusites, the inhabitants of Jerusalem, the children of Israel could not drive them out. But the Jebusites dwell with the children of Judah at Jerusalem unto this day. The above statement may be compared with the statement made by the 2nd book of Samuel, which confirms that the Jebusites were living in Jerusalem up until the 70th year of the ascension of David to the throne, as mentioned in Samuel chapter 5, verses 6 to 8. The author of Joshua's statement said that the Jebusites dwelt in Jerusalem unto this day, meaning the 7th year of David's ascension to throne. This clearly implies that the author belonged to that period. Similarly, the same book includes this statement, And they drove not out the Canaanites that dwelt in Gezer, but the Canaanites dwell among the Ephraimites unto this day. We find another statement in 1 King chapter 9, verse 16, that the Pharaoh had driven out the Canaanites from Gezer in the time of Solomon. This leads to the conclusion that the book was written before the time of Solomon. G.T. Manley has therefore admitted that a comparison of Josh chapter 15, verse 63, with 2 Samuel chapter 5, verses 7 to 9, and of Josh chapter 16, verse 10, with 1 Kings chapter 9, verse 16, leads to the conclusion that this book was written before Rehoboam. See 2 Samuel chapter 1, verse 18. In view of this evidence, it is logical to conclude that the author of the book of Joshua must have lived after the prophet David. The status of the Book of Judges. The Book of Judges is the third most respected book of the Old Testament. Again, we are faced by a great difference of opinion regarding the author of the book and the possible period of its compilation. Some Christian writers claim it to be the Book of Phinehas, while some others believe it to have been written by Hezekiah. In neither of these cases can it be said to be a revealed book, because neither Phinehas nor Hezekiah are prophets. Hezekiah was the king of Judah, as mentioned in 2 Kings chapter 18, and Chronicles verse 32. Some other writers have asserted that this book was written by Ezra. It may be noted that difference of time between Ezra and Phinehas is not less than 900 years. This difference of opinion could not arise if the Christians possessed any real evidence concerning it. According to the Jews, all these claims and assertions are wrong. They, on the basis of conjecture, attribute it to Samuel. So there are 6 different opinions about it. The Book of Ruth. This book too is the subject of great differences of opinion. Some Christians think that it was written by Hezekiah, in which case it is not a revealed book. Some others hold the opinion that the author of this book is Ezra. All other Christians and the Jews attribute it to Samuel. It is stated in the introduction to the Bible printed in Strasbourg in 1819 that the Book of Ruth is a collection of family stories, and the Book of Job is only a tale. The Book of Nehemiah. The same kind of difference is present regarding the author and the period of this book. The most popular opinion is that it was written by Nehemiah. Athanasius, Epiphanius, and Chrysostom believe it to have been written by Ezra. According to popular opinion, it cannot be accepted as a revealed book. The first 26 verses of chapter 12 are different from the rest of the book of Nehemiah, since in the first 11 chapters, Nehemiah is referred to in the first person, while in this chapter, the third person is used for no apparent reason. Furthermore, we find Darius, the king of Persia, being mentioned in verse 22 of the same chapter, when in fact he lived 100 years after the death of Nehemiah. The Christian commentators have to declare this anomaly as a later addition. The Arabic translator of the Bible has omitted it altogether. The Book of Job. The history of the Book of Job is even more obscure and uncertain than the other books. There are about 24 contradictory opinions regarding its name and period. Maimonides, a celebrated scholar and rabbi of the Jews, Michael, Leclerc, Semler, Hock, Isnak, and other Christians insist that Job is a fictitious name, and the Book of Job is no more than a fiction. Theodore has also condemned it. Luther, the leader of the Protestant faith, holds it as purely a fictitious story. The book has been attributed to various names on the basis of conjecture. However, if we assume that the book was written by Elihu, or by a certain unknown person who was a contemporary of Manasseh, it is not acceptable as a prophetic and revealed text. Elihu, the son of Barachel, the Buzite, was one of the friends of Job, whose dialogue with Job is included in the book, John chapter 32, verse 6. The Psalm of David. The history of this book too is similar to the history of the Book of Job. We do not find any documentary evidence to show a particular man to be its writer. The period of collection of all the Psalms is also not known. Whether the names of the Psalms are prophetic or not is also unknown. The ancient Christians have different opinions about it. The writers, Origen, Chrysostom, and Augustine, believe it to have been written by the prophet David himself. On the other hand, writers like Hilary, Athanasius, Jerome, and Eusebius have strictly refuted this. Eusebius, a bishop of Palestine, was born in 260 AD and is famous for his book, The History of the Christian Church. He died in 340 AD. Horn says, undoubtedly the former statement is altogether wrong. According to the opinion of the latter group, more than 30 psalms are from unknown authors. 10 psalms from 90 to 99 are supposed to be from Moses, and the 71 psalms are claimed to be from David. Psalm 88 is attributed to Heman. The Ezrabite, who was the Ezrabite, was a famous physician of the time, mentioned in 1 Kings chapter 4, verse 31. And 89 to Ethan, who was also a physician like Heman, mentioned in Kings chapter 4, verse 31. While Psalms 72 and 177 are said to be from Solomon, and 3 psalms are believed to be from Jeduthun, and 120 psalms from Asaph. But some Christians refute that Psalms 74 and 79 are written by him. 11 psalms are supposed to have been written by 3 sons of Korah. Some writers even think that the author of these psalms to the various writers concerned, while yet others of the psalms were written by another unknown person. Some writers even think that the author of these psalms to the various writers concerned, while yet others of the psalms were written by another unknown person. Kalmat says that only 45 psalms were written by David, while the rest are by other people. The ancient Jewish scholars enumerate the following names as the writers of the Psalms: the prophets Adam, Abraham, Moses, and Asaph, Heman, Jeduthun, and the 3 sons of Korah, David only having collected them together. According to them, David himself is not the author of any of the Psalms. He is just the collector of them. Horn said that the judgment of modern Christian and Jewish scholars is that this book was written by the following authors: the prophets Moses, David, and Solomon, and Asaph, Heman, Ethan, Jeduthun, and the 3 sons of Korah. The same contradiction and confusion is found regarding the period of its compilation. Some scholars hold them to have been written and compiled in the time of David. Some believed that they were collected by some friends of Hezekiah in his period, while some others think that they were compiled in different periods. Similar differences are also expressed about the names of the Psalms. Some claim that they are revealed, while others think that someone who was not a prophet had called them with these names. Psalms 72 verse 20 says, "The prayers of David, the son of Jesse, are ended." This verse has been omitted in the Arabic translations apparently with the purpose of supporting the opinion of the first group that the whole book of Psalms was written by the prophet David. On the other hand, it is also possible that this verse might have been added later to support the second group's opinion that the prophet David was not the author of this book. In both cases, the distortion of the text is proved either by omission of this verse or by addition of it. The Book of Proverbs. The condition of this book, too, is not much different from the books we have discussed so far. A few writers have claimed that the author of this whole book is the prophet Solomon himself. This claim is false because of variations in linguistic idioms and style, and repetition of several verses found in this book. Apart from this, the first verses of chapters 30 and 31 also refute this assumption. Even if we accept that some part of this book could have been written by Solomon, which is possibly true for 29 chapters, these were not collected or compiled in his period, because there is no doubt that several of them were collected by Hezekiah, as is evident from chapter 25, verse 1. These are also Proverbs of Solomon, which the men of Hezekiah, king of Judah, copied out. This was done 270 years after the death of Solomon. Some writers are of the opinion that the first 9 chapters of the book were not written by Solomon. Chapters 30 and 31 are attributed to Agur and Lemuel, as cited, but strangely the commentators could neither find out who these 2 authors were, nor are they sure of their being prophets. On the basis of their usual presumptions, they hold that they were prophets. However, this kind of conjecture is not acceptable to an impartial reader. Some of them think that Lemuel is the second name of Solomon, but Henry and Scott state, Holden has rejected the assumption that Lemuel was another name of Solomon, and he has proved that Lemuel was a separate person. Perhaps he has got sufficient proof that the Book of Lemuel and the Book of Agur are revealed books. Otherwise, they could have not been included in the canonical books. Adam Clarke says in his commentary, this claim is not supported by any evidence that Lemuel was Solomon. This chapter was written a long period after his death. The idioms of the Chaldean language that are found in the beginning of this book also refute this claim. And he comments on chapter 31. Certainly this chapter could not have been written by Solomon. Verse 25 of this chapter says, there are also Proverbs of Solomon, which the men of Hezekiah copied out. Verse 30 in the Persian version of the Bible printed 1838 says, the words Agur, the son of Jakeh, even the prophecy, the man spoken unto Ithiel and Ukal. And the Bible printed in the Persian language in 1845 contains this. The word of Agur, son of Jaffa, was such that the man spoke unto Ithiel, even Ithiel and Ukal. The majority of writers have admitted that the book was compiled by many people, including Hezekiah, Isaiah, and perhaps Ezra. The Book of Ecclesiastes. This book too has a history of serious differences. Some writers have claimed that its author was Solomon. Rabbi Kamti, a famous Jewish scholar, said that it was written by Isaiah. The scholars of the Talmud attribute it to Hezekiah, while Grotius says that this book was written by Zorobabel for his son Abihud. John, a Christian scholar, and some German scholars calculate it to have been written after the release of the Israelites from Babylon. The Book of the Song of Solomon. The history of this book is even more obscure and uncertain. Some of the writers attribute it to the prophet Solomon or some person belonging to his time. Dr. Kennicott and some writers coming after him, and the opinion that the claim of it being written by Solomon was historically wrong, and that it was written a long time after his death. Theodore, a missionary who lived in the 5th century AD, strictly condemned his book and the Book of Job, while Simon and Leclerc did not acknowledge it as a genuine book. Whiston said it was a foul song and should be excluded from the holy books of the Old Testament. Some others have made the same judgment about it. Semler holds it as a forged and fabricated book. The Catholic, Ward, has pointed out that Castillo declared it to be a vile song, decided that it should be excluded from the books of the Old Testament. The Book of Daniel. The Greek translation, the Latin translation, and all the translations of the Roman Catholics include the Song of Three Children and chapter 13 and 14 of this book. The Roman Catholic faith acknowledges this song and the 2 chapters, but the Protestants disapprove of it and do not consider it genuine. The Book of Esther. The name of the writer of this book as well as the time of its compilation is unknown. Christian scholars believe that it was written by scholars living in the period between Ezra and Simon. A Jewish scholar, Fleon, claims that it was written by Jehoiachin, the son of Joshua, who had come to Jerusalem after the release from Babylon. St. Augustine believed it to be a book of Ezra. Some other writers attribute it to Murdoch and Esther. Other details of this book will later be discussed in chapter 2 of this book. The Book of Jeremiah. We are certain that chapter 52 of this book cannot be claimed to have been written by Jeremiah. Similarly, the 11th verse of chapter 10 cannot be attributed to Jeremiah. In the former case, because verse 64 of chapter 51 of the Persian version 1838 contains, "Thus far are the words of Jeremiah," while the Persian translation of 1839 AD says, "The words of Jeremiah ended here." In the latter case, the reason is that verse 11 of chapter 10 is in the Chaldean language, while the rest of the book is in Hebrew. It is impossible to trace who inserted them in the text. The commentators have made several conjectures regarding the persons making this insertion. The compilers of Henry and Scott remarked about this chapter. It appears that Ezra or some other person inserted it to elucidate the predictions occurring in the previous chapter. Horn says on the page 194 of Volume 4, "This chapter was added after the death of Jeremiah and the release from the captivity of Babylon, some of which we find mentioned in this chapter too." Further in this volume he says, "Certainly, the words of this prophet are in the Hebrew language, but chapter 10 verse 11 is in the Chaldean language." The Reverend Vinema said, "This verse is a later addition." The Book of Isiah. A public debate was held between Karkanar, a religious leader of the Roman Catholics, and Warren about this book. This discussion was published in 1852 in Agra, India. Karkaran writes in third letter that Stalin, a learned German writer, had said that chapter 40 and all the chapters up to chapter 66 of the Book of Isaiah were not written by Isaiah. This implies that 27 chapters of this book are not the writings of Isaiah.